Take your Bible, please, and turn to the Gospel of Mark this evening. And we're going to be looking at chapter 3 in the Gospel of Mark and the first 8 verses of the 3rd chapter of Mark's Gospel. And once we start to read, you'll recognize this as the story of the man with the withered hand who was in the synagogue when Jesus came there that day, and Jesus healed him. And the title of this study is The Case of the Crippled Christian. I want to read a couple or three quotes before I begin this evening that I've copied out of other material. And I'm not sure that one of them will be so easy to understand. I'll try to explain it as we go along, but I want you to be sure to hear these, because these are actually commentaries on the text we have before us tonight. And we'll also show you what God expects when we handle a text like this. And quite frankly, it's rather devastating when you consider what God expects is over against what tradition has just caused us to do when we listen to truth or when we read a text. I'm going to read from a book on Transforming Bible Study. That's the name of it. Bible Study that Transforms. And this is the author's own testimony, and I'm just going to break into it and read 2 very short paragraphs. He said, "I was totally shocked when the real power of the story of the healing of the man with the withered hand reached me." Now think carefully of what you're hearing. When the real power of the story of the healing of the man with the withered hand reached me. I will be frank to tell you that never happens to most people in church. They appraise the truth, they enjoy the truth, they brag on the person who presents the truth, but frankly it's evident that the truth that's stated in the text they hear apparently didn't reach them, because there's no evidence of it afterwards at all. Listen, when I attempted to internalize the story, to find the aspect of me that is withered or paralyzed and has never taken its rightful role in my selfhood. Now think carefully of what he's saying. Let me read that again. When I attempted to internalize the story, and underscore in your mind the term internalize the story. See, this is what God expects every time we read the Bible. He expects an internalizing or personalizing. Personalizing means you project your personality into the story, and you let the story project itself in its full impact, intent, and power into your personality. He calls that internalizing the story. He says, when I attempted to internalize the story, to find the aspect of me that is really withered or paralyzed and has never taken its rightful role in my selfhood. In other words, the paralytic part can't play its role. It's atrophied. It's paralyzed. And thus it cannot play its role. It's like a hand, just like this man in the story. He said, when I saw this, I was devastated. Now let me turn a page and read the second very brief paragraph. Learning to approach Scripture in this way has necessarily involved for me a long, slow, and at times painful process of recovering lost functions of my spiritual life. Now remember, lost functions. This is the part that's paralyzed. This is like the man with the withered hand. Causes lost functions in my spiritual life, as if that part is just totally erased. And the task of the Christian in growth is to recover those lost functions, and it will require a miracle, just like this man had to get his hand restored. So the Christian life should be a day by day, hour by hour, moment by moment succession of endless miracles. Whatever led us to believe that the Christian life starts with a massive miracle of salvation and then it all ceases, and we wait to be transported to heaven. That's not the Christian life of the Bible. The miracles of daily experience in the Bible for a Christian are as great as the initial one that brought him from non-existence to existence in a birth, brought him from death to life in salvation. The ensuing miracles are equally as great as that one. Listen. But this has also been the most fruitful and exciting journey of my life. That is the recovery of these lost functions that are paralyzed in my spiritual life. This has been the most fruitful and exciting journey of my life. Now, I want to call your attention to several phrases I just read. Get this one. When I attempted to internalize the story. Now, I want to remind everybody present here this evening, this is what God expects while I'm talking. He expects me, He expects every listener, He expects you behind the camera, when this film reaches you, to internalize this story. He expects you to put your personality into it and put it into the thick of your personality. So it changes you by exchange. I mean, this one story, and this is to be true of every story. So the Christian life is a day-by-day succession of endless miracles as long as we live, where we project ourselves into the story and it projects its power into us, and we receive the miracle of the healing of the crippled parts, or the paralyzed, the blank parts. And he also said, I sought to find the part of my spiritual life that is withered and paralyzed and thus has never taken its rightful role in my life. And then let me call your attention to that second one. I'll paraphrase this just a little. So I engaged in a long, slow, painful process of recovering the paralyzed places or the lost functions of my spiritual life. Then I want to read a paragraph out of C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis is my favorite writer outside of Scripture. And the reasons for that are many. I've probably got 500 books in my library, either by C.S. Lewis or about C.S. Lewis. I've read 16 biographies of C.S. Lewis. That should tell you how much appreciation I have for this absolute genius of a man whom God turned upside down a little later in life than most people get saved, and then turned him loose on the whole international scene, and he became probably the greatest lay apologist in the history of the Christian church. I want to read a paragraph, and this won't be easy. This won't unravel with one pull. So I may have to explain a little bit as we go along, but listen to it carefully. The central miracle asserted by Christians is that of the incarnation of Jesus Christ. That is, that God actually became a human being. Every other miracle prepares for this one, or exhibits this one, or results from this one. There is no question in Christianity of arbitrary interferences just scattered about. Now let me explain that. Arbitrary interferences means when God steps into your life, He didn't just do it to spend time of day. He didn't just do it because there's an opening. He didn't just do it by accident. It's not arbitrary, and it is an interference. It is a divine invasion, a divine intrusion. And when God comes into your life, it is not by chance or caprice. It is not arbitrary. It is divinely elected by God for eternal purposes, and this is to set in motion in your life on this earth those eternal purposes. So these are not simply arbitrary interferences just scattered around like salt thrown out on the ground. Listen, it relates not a series of disconnected raids on nature or human nature. It means these things that intrude into nature, the miracles, or into human nature, the miracles in human experience. They're not just disconnected raids on nature or human nature, but they are the various steps of a strategically coherent invasion. Notice the word strategically. God has something strategy-wise, strategic in mind every time He invests in somebody like that. And it only begins with the investment. Most people say, wonderful, God visited me. Well, I want to know what's next. He didn't just put that in you for you to swell up and have a great experience. Now, if He did, He wasted all of it because you already had the experience of the new birth. No, that's not what this is about. This is an invasion which intends, listen, complete conquest of every province in your life and total occupation by the one who came to dwell in you the day you were saved. Now listen to that. It intends complete conquest. That means there are areas in your life that are not yet conquered. These are the paralyzed parts. This is the withered part. Listen to his conclusion. Every miracle, then, is a picture of additional conquests on God's part in human experience. So every miracle Jesus performed either points to the new birth by which a person is saved, and there are not many of those. Most of the miracles don't point to the original salvation. They point to the succeeding conquests in the province of the person's life, and especially the parts that remain or have become paralyzed since then. Now, look at the text. We're in Mark chapter 3. Let me read verses 1 through 8. And I'm reading from the King James Bible. I want you to keep all those introductory remarks in mind. Mark 3:1 says, "And Jesus entered again into the synagogue." Now I want you to underscore in your mind the word again. This means that Jesus had the habit of going to church. And just think of what he had to put up with. Can you imagine the Son of God listening in the local synagogues every Sabbath to those stuffy old rabbis? But he had the habit of going to church. See, we have good habits, we have bad habits, and the good habits are to overwhelm and bury the bad habits. And this is to be a part of that vocation. And that may mean a victory in a paralyzed part of our lives tonight, because we've let bad habits take the place of what God intends. So there's a lesson in every line here. He entered again into the synagogue, and there was a man there. Now this is what sets the drama of the story. There was a man there who had a withered hand. And they, now let me tell you who these they are. According to Luke's gospel, they are the scribes and Pharisees. In other words, they are the inveterate enemies of Jesus. And they're just coming to hard crystallization of their enmity at this point of the story. So let's put those names in there. The scribes, the copyists of the law, the interpreters of the law, who lived legally just like the Pharisees did, but did not know God. Missed Jesus when he came, so they missed God. They watched Jesus, looked at him like a hawk. This is an imperfect tense middle voice verb. What it means is they kept looking at him for their own purposes. Let me say it again. These scribes and Pharisees, imperfect, means they kept on looking at him for their own designs. And it tells us what those designs were. Whether he would heal this man on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse Jesus. Now it's going to get a whole lot worse than that as the story goes along. At this point, they're just looking for a charge to do something serious to him. Let me show you something else. Look at verse 2 again. The word Sabbath in verse 2 is major emphasis. That means it is actually a shout. The Holy Spirit arranges it so it is a shout from the page. They said, "You don't mean to tell me on the Sabbath, the very Sabbath day, you're going to heal this man?" See, they were legalists. In other words, though the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, they missed it and elevated the Sabbath so that it controlled the man. Even if the man is dying or dead or sick, nobody can touch him to help him because it's the Sabbath day. And Jesus did not live by that legalism, so he's about to do something here. Now listen to verse 3. "And he said unto the man who had the withered hand, Stand forth." I think it's the NIV that says, "Get up and come out here." One says, "Come down here." It sounds like a Baptist invitation at the end of the sermon. Get up and come down here. And it has that same effect. See, he's in the security of anonymity in a crowd. And Jesus said, come out from here, come out from them, and come over here and stand by me. Cast your lot here. You're going to leave them, first of all. That's going to jeopardize his position with them if this doesn't work. And you're going to put yourself in my hands, so you're going to depend on me or you'll get nothing. Because they'll reject you, and you didn't get anything from me either. So he's putting him to the test. He says, get up and come out here. And then he said unto them, notice he spoke to the man first, and the initiative belongs to Christ. Remember, all these miracles that deal with the withered parts of you, or the unconquered provinces in you, they all start with the initiative of Christ. Because this is not just what you want. You may know where you're crippled, but the key is what he wants. And he's not healing you just for you to enjoy a miracle. There's a purpose far bigger than that. So he said, get up and come out here. And then he spoke to them, that is the scribes and Pharisees. He said, is it lawful? Somebody give me another word for the word lawful. You probably got another translation. What is it? All right. What's the other translation?
Legal.
All right, that's it. Is it legal? See, these people were legalists. That means they were bound to the letter of the law and had no freedom with God, no relationship with God at all. They were bound to the law but didn't know the Lord of the law. And so he takes them on their grounds. Is it legal to do good on the Sabbath days or to do evil? Now, what in the world does that question mean? Is it legal to do good on the Sabbath days or to do evil? What is he saying? Here's a man with a badly withered hand. If I do good to him, what am I going to do? Somebody tell me. Heal him. If I do evil, what am I going to do? Nothing. You understand what Jesus is saying? The only final sin is the sin of doing nothing. See, all these things that impress us as being great sins, if you were serving him, there wouldn't be room for those things. So here we are bothered by things that wouldn't even bother us at all if we did the right thing. So the question is, are we just doing nothing, or are we really doing what he calls good? The greatest sin of all is the sin of doing nothing. You know why people go to hell? Because they did nothing. Jesus died, rose again, offered himself to them. They did nothing with the offer. They just ignored it. Acted like everything was intact in themselves. So this question again is very vital. Then he adds to it, is it legal to save life or to kill? Now understand what he's saying. If I heal this man, and you need to keep this in mind, I'm saving his life. Now what does that mean? How does healing a hand save a man's life? That's the reason we ought to stay with this story very carefully. It says, is it legal to save life or to kill? If I don't heal him, I'm killing him. Now what does that mean? See how carefully we ought to read this? And they didn't have any answer. It says, but they held their peace. They muted their mouths. Look at verse 5. And when he had looked round about on them with anger. Now, that looked round about on them with anger is an aorist tense verb. It means it occurred once. This wasn't habitual with Jesus. This wasn't a regular course with him. But look at the next phrase. Being grieved. Now that shows an habitual course. He was constantly heartbroken, but he was seldom angry. Being grieved for the hardness, A.T. Robertson says that word is a word for marble, stone. Shows you the kind of hardness of their hearts. It was like marble stone. See what you've got here? One man is in church with a withered hand, and there's a whole host of people there with withered hearts. And their hearts are hard. Now understand, this is exactly the way he sees church most of the time. If we only knew, in other words, if the church were what it ought to be, this would be common in church. But the fact that this does not commonly happen means that most people in church, have withered hearts. And they need the miracle of this part of them healed, just like he needed the miracle of his hand healed. So it says he was grieved for the hardness of their hearts. And then he turned away from them and spoke again to the man. He said to the man, here's his second command. Stretch forth your hand. You can't possibly appreciate the devastation of that command. Stretch forth your hand. And he stretched it out. And his hand was, and this is major emphasis, it was actually restored as complete as the other hand. Look what happened. See, those with withered hearts really show it now. And the Pharisees went forth and immediately took counsel with the Herodians. Now normally they were rabid enemies. They were constant enemies. But here, their common hatred for Jesus made strange bedfellows out of them. They became friends in their enmity against him when they couldn't stand each other normally. Pharisees went forth and immediately took counsel with the Herodians. See, the Pharisees were religious legalists. The Herodians were political legalists. And they took counsel against him how they might destroy him. But Jesus withdrew himself with his disciples to the sea, and a great multitude from Galilee followed him, and from Judea, and from Jerusalem, and from Idumea, and from beyond Jordan, and they about Tyre and Sidon, a great multitude. The word in each case is the word mega. That's the Greek word. You'll recognize that word. A mega market is a giant market. What this says is, I mean, a big crowd. A giant multitude of people came from all over these areas. And here's the reason. When they had heard what great things he did, they came unto him. So this guy's little crippled hand, and what happened to it, gained for Jesus an incredible thrust of popularity in all these surrounding territories and the other miracles he was performing as well. Let's begin tonight with a rule of interpretation. Let me state it. Every parable Jesus ever told is an absolute miracle of divine wisdom. Let me say that again. Be careful to get it. You sure your heart's not withered here? Listen carefully. Every parable Jesus ever told is an absolute miracle of divine wisdom. Just read his parables. They're miracles of divine wisdom, every one of them. Let's turn that around. Every miracle Jesus ever performed is a parable of divine truth and divine power. In other words, these are not just something he did, something mighty. These are not just wonders, these miracles. Every one of them is given to contain a lesson, a message, a truth. And we are responsible to find that truth, and as the author said, to personalize or internalize it so that we project our personality into the truth that that miracle is showing us. And God is able to project the power of that miracle into the middle of our personalities. So you see, this is what's supposed to happen. What a place this would be. What a place the fellowship of believers would be if every time a Christian was exposed to the Bible, that's the way he read it. What a place the church fellowship would be if every time we were there, that's the way people came. God, speak to me today. And please swell my heart with this and internalize, personalize this in me so that when I leave, I'm a walking example of what I just heard, and I'm going to share it everywhere I go, and I'm going to be ready for the next one. If I drown this one, you're going to get quiet with regard to the next one. If I miss this one, you'll soon stop talking. So I'll keep on going to church and become reprobate in church. See, bait means to suspend. Pro means in front of. Reprobate means you do it again. So the pastor gets up there, takes the truth, puts it in front of the people, and they don't listen, they don't hear it, they don't internalize it. They're just glad they're there. They're happy they're making brownie points with God, and it's an enjoyable atmosphere, and God goes begging with the internalizing of his truth. And you come back on Sunday night, and he speaks a little gentler because he's tired of talking to people who won't do anything about it. And soon He takes the word reprobate, spells it with a capital R, and in church, you, as a saved person, become a reprobate as a hearer of God's truth because you didn't internalize it. See, I'm just telling you what we should have known all the time. There's nothing new about this. It's in the Bible. Read the book of Hebrews. Warns you about the way you listen over and over again. Today, when you hear his voice, harden not your heart. The very same word. Don't make your heart like granite just by being indifferent and thinking it's just wonderful to be here. No, you've got to internalize this truth and become a walking reincarnation of Christ. So that when you go out, it happens to anybody in front of you while it's happening in you. This is the way it is. Now let's look at this let's look at this miracle. I want you to see three pictures, as if you were looking at successive left to right pictures in a succession of three frames, or three pictures. In the first one, there's a problem. In the second one, there's a provision. And in the third one, you see the product of that provision. Let me say it again. In the first one, there's a problem. It's the crippled man. In the second one, there's a provision. He gets healed. And in the third one, there's a product. The whole countryside is turned upside down because of a man's hand and what Jesus did with it. It tells us that. He contributed to all that publicity for Jesus. Let's take these one at a time. The first frame has to do with the problem of a disabled cripple. Now, I want to read verse 1 again because it has a load in it that we can't touch just by reading the verse. We've got to interpret more richly what it says. There's no way any translation can get everything that's here across to you. Just leave out the first part of the verse and listen to it. There was a man in the synagogue who had a withered hand. That sounds simple enough, doesn't it? But remember, we're here to find out what this says so we can internalize it. Let me tell you what that says. First, the term he had a withered hand. That is a perfect passive participle. That means that at one point in his life, something had happened to this hand, and it's as if in a moment he lost it. He had full use of both hands up to this moment. That's a perfect tense. And at one point, either by accident or disease or something, this hand withered away. Now what does that tell us? This man wasn't born with this problem. That verb doesn't accommodate that. It was not a congenital defect. He wasn't born with it. He got it long after he was born. Now here's the reason that's important. Long-standing church tradition stretching all the way back to the days of the Gospels tell us that this man was a brick mason. Now, do you see why to heal him is to save his life? And to not heal him is to kill him? You're taking away his livelihood in one case, you're re-providing it or putting it back in place in another case. So this story is much bigger than it looks. This man did not have a congenital defect. Something happened along the way. Now, that raises some questions. Look at the word withered there. That's not the only time that word is used in the Gospel of Mark. This is exactly the same word that is used in Mark 11 when Jesus cursed the fig tree. I want you to listen to the exact words. And it dried up to its roots. Now, does that tell you what this looked like? What did it look like? It's as if he had no hand at all. It dried up to his wrist. At best, he has a nub of a hand. That's all. In other words, this is not just a hand that's twisted. This is a hand that's dismissed. It's gone. Those of you who are baseball fans will remember the name of Jim Abbott if you're old enough. I remember him well. He's a lot younger than I am. He was an All-American pitcher for either Michigan or Michigan State quite some years ago now. He was a left-handed pitcher, but he was born almost totally without a right arm. He just had a little suggestion, less than half the size of my arm, and had little nubs of fingers. They weren't, you couldn't detect them if you hadn't seen them there where the hands belong, you wouldn't know they were fingers. And he played Major League Baseball for several years. Played for, I think, the California Angels first, then they traded to the New York Yankees. He had a pretty reasonable record and career for his handicap. Here's what he would do. He would keep his glove between this nub of an arm and his body hold it in place there. He would wind up awkwardly and throw to the plate with his left hand. Then he'd quickly get his glove on this hand in case the ball was hit back to him. If the ball was hit back to him, he could only handle it with this gloved hand. And then he would put the glove with the ball in it in here, take the ball out and deliver it to whatever his point was. First base, home plate, whatever, wherever he needed to throw it. And he had a remarkable career. Suppose on the Monday night game of the week, Jim Abbott is pitching tonight for the California Angels. And they try not to do it. At first they made a great deal of this. They zeroed in on that and explained it all, and it became awkward to keep on saying that every time. Here's a handicapped, crippled man out there on the mound pitching Major League Baseball, and they didn't want to major on his handicap, so they kind of just zeroed in, let it be, didn't say much about it, and went on. Suppose he's pitching that night, everybody's watching, and he's between pitches, and he takes his hat off and puts it here, and he's wiping his brow, and suddenly, in front of that entire nationwide, international television audience, that hand suddenly pops out of the wrist and comes back again. Can you imagine what the people would say? Is that digitalized? They'd say. Is that artificial? What kind of trick are they playing on us? So they wouldn't believe for an instant there was a miracle that had taken place there. See how awkward these things are? This is not time of day. This is God's intrusion into people's lives. This is God made flesh in the person of Christ. And suddenly, that hand, you know what? Luke, the medical doctor, who would give special attention to medical details, says that it is his right hand. Now, do you know the part that hands play in biblical symbolism? The hand is the instrument for embracing. The hand is the instrument for receiving. The hand is the instrument for holding. The hand is the instrument for welcoming. We speak of the right hand of fellowship, and that comes out of the Bible. Furthermore, the right side is the place of authority, fertility, fruitfulness. Jesus is seated tonight at the right hand of God, the place of authority. So when it says this man's right hand was withered, that's what Luke tells us. He's very technical. He's a medical doctor, examined these things carefully. Then we know something big is up here. There's more than meets the eye here. Now, who does this man represent? Remember, every miracle is a lesson. Every miracle has a message. So who does this man represent? Well, let's turn it around negatively. He's not dead. So who can't he represent? Somebody tell me. Sinner. A lost sinner. Can't represent a lost person. He's not dead. Lost people are dead. They have no organ of relationship with God. They're stone dead in the only area of life that counts. This man's not dead. He's just crippled. See, he has life, but it's a poor, non-functional, partial, handicapped, crippled life. So who does he represent? He represents the child of God who is no longer dead, but he is crippled. So this is the case of the crippled Christian. He has a poor half life. I wonder how many Christians there are like that. And they just assume this is the way I am. No, Jesus doesn't assume that. That's the reason he gets you in church. Because he wants to operate on that paralysis. He wants to take that atrophy and cure it. He wants to take the withered part out of you so it can become functional for his sake. Just like this man's hand became functional and he became a part of the parade of publicity for Jesus Christ. So this man represents the Christian who is crippled. Let me ask you a question. What is God's biggest problem on earth? Don't try to answer that. Just think. Let me ask again. What is God's biggest problem? God only has one problem on earth. You know what it is? It's a crippled church. Because you see, the church is His body. And it operates just like my body operates. I am an invisible person living inside of this physical body, and the only way the invisible person has to express himself is by the way he uses his body. You would not know me except you're hearing what I'm saying, you're watching my gestures, you're examining my body language, everything. So I put my invisible personality on display by the way I use my body. That is exactly the way Jesus operates, 100%. If you were to approach Jesus in heaven tonight and say, Lord, how are you doing? You'd get a double answer. Here's what it would sound like. In myself, I'm doing perfectly. But in my body, I'm terribly crippled. The Christians hear me? That's what this miracle is about. He's not content to have a crippled body. The Son of God does not want to operate limping on a body, or without a tongue, or with just one eye, or one hand, or one withered, or no knees. He doesn't want to operate on a body like that, in a body like that. So He will leave a body that doesn't give Him a functional expression and go find one that's more closely operating by what He wants. So be awfully careful here. What He wants to do is to work the miracle that will cure that crippled content. So here's the first thing, the problem of this disabled cripple. Now let's go to the second one. You go to the second frame of this three-frame picture, and here's what you have. You have the provision of a divine miracle. The provision of a divine miracle. Listen to the last part of verse 5. Is this big? It says His hand, and this is major emphasis, was actually restored as complete as the other one. So this man received the provision of a divine miracle. I want to trace the steps on the part of this man. You can see Jesus in action doing what He normally does. But how did this man get in on it? What made him focal to the story? Was he the only person in need in church that day? Well, maybe. He's certainly the only one that had a need like this, or probably so. So what enabled him to get in on this miracle? I want to give you 3 successive statements that show what he did to get in on it. Number 1, he realized his need. He realized his need. He had to. He couldn't hide it. If he tried to tuck his withered hand inside of his tunic, it became conspicuous because he's trying to hide it. If he brought it out in the open, it was obvious. So he couldn't hide it. He had to admit his need. Now, wouldn't it be wonderful if every Christian, every crippled Christian in the world had a need that was so conspicuous that he couldn't do what we usually do in church. We usually go to church and just sit there and look sufficient. We screw down our halos when we've got crippled places blotting our lives everywhere. I'm not asking you today, are you crippled? Because there's no such thing as a Christian who's not crippled somewhere. See, we're not perfect. We're not like Jesus fully. So we're crippled somewhere. I'm asking you, where are you crippled? Because that's where He wants to operate. Now, every person listening to me in this room, I want you to put yourself under quiz right now, under inquisition. I want you to hold judgment over the court of your own life right now. And in the next few minutes, I want you to ask yourself, where am I crippled? Where am I disqualifying Jesus? What part of me is withered like this man's hand was? He realized his need. Here's the second thing he did. He utilized his opportunity. After all, where was he? Somebody tell me.
Church.
In church. Do you realize This is a local synagogue, a long ways from Jerusalem, probably 90 miles from Jerusalem. Do you realize this man could not get in the temple in Jerusalem? They wouldn't let crippled people in. And it was questionable at prominent local synagogues. So it's remarkable that he was even here. He knew the law, he knew the restrictions, but something kept him going. He kept on going through the motions. But here's the big thing. Not only was he in church that morning, but Jesus was there. And here's the rule. When a person is right with Jesus, the presence of Jesus is his greatest joy. But when a person is wrong with Jesus, the presence of Jesus is his greatest opportunity. Let me say that again. When a person is right with Jesus, the presence of Jesus is his greatest joy. It's his celebration. But when he's wrong with Jesus, when something is not right, when he's carrying that crippled place, the presence of Jesus is his greatest opportunity. So this man had enhanced his own opportunity by being in church that Sabbath morning, that Saturday morning. And the fact that Jesus was there, when you threw those into the mix, there was a miracle in the making. Now the truth is that every time we gather in church, Jesus is there. Most of us never capitalize for a miracle because we don't expect to. We're just going through the same things we've always done in church. And that disqualifies him. While we're carrying crippled places, he sadly goes his way because we do not realize our need to expose it conspicuously to others and to him, and we don't utilize our opportunity. Here's the third thing he did. This man actualized the words of Jesus. That's the most important thing in the story. He actualized, that is, he acted out the words of Jesus. Would any Christian question the importance of that? Jesus spoke to this man 2 times. And each time he spoke, it took the form of a command that has equal force to any one of the 10 commandments. That's the reason when he speaks, we must hear, or we cancel heaven's authority. And we keep on building more crippled places in our lives. And it is not enough to go to church. This man could have left church without the miracle. Not enough to go to church. We have to personalize, internalize, actualize, act out the words Jesus gives us in any situation, not just salvation. Everything he says. When we run into the new thing, it has to be internalized. And Jesus spoke twice, so listen to them. He said, get up and come out here. Stand forth. One translation says, stand up and come forward. I repeat, that sounds just like a Baptist invitation at the end of the sermon. Don't stay where you are. You're hidden. Now, listen carefully. Most people in church are anonymous because they're in a crowd. And sociologically, here's the rule. When you hear something in a crowd, you're not likely to do it. Go back and read the story of Kitty Genovese, that woman that was brutally stabbed. She was stabbed 40-something times in a plaza in a high-rise courtyard with high-rise buildings all around. 39 people confessed that they heard her screaming and saw it out their windows, some in doorways, and not one did anything. Not one. He left the scene, the attacker left the scene, she was bleeding profusely. She managed to crawl in, leaving a heavy stream of blood behind her. Got up on 2 or 3 steps in one of those stairwells. People came and looked and ducked back into their apartments. He came back with the same bloody knife and finished her off. A second time, nobody called anybody. Nobody asked a policeman to come, nobody. Sociology took that on. It made headlines all over this nation. I've got paper articles, newspaper articles on that, numbers of them. Why, they said. Why? And here's what sociology said. They examined one case after another. The more people see it, the less likely anybody is to do anything about it. If one person had seen it, he had gone to the phone probably immediately, or 2 or 3. But beyond that, they're neutralized by the crowd. Most people in church are spectators to an event and will never act. See, this is the danger of going to church unless somebody teaches you all of these things. And I mean teaches you incredibly. They'll never act. They'll be out there on the street sharing Christ. They'll be in the offices and in the shops sharing Christ. They'll be in Walmart sharing Christ. They'll be scattering seeds everywhere. But we go and come and all those lost people around us all day long. And we do nothing. We're crippled desperately. And the Son of God is forced to hobble around because our lives are cells in His body. He said, declare yourself. Get up out of that crowd. Stop being anonymous in the crowd and become a person. Get up and come out here. If I fail you, you have no chance. But they're not doing you any good. You got the problem already. So get up and come out here. Stand with me. That man got up and walked across the intervening distance and came to Jesus. Boy, is this a big story. You listen to me carefully. Then Jesus spoke the second thing. He brought this man into isolation with Himself. You have no problem that isolation with Jesus will not cure. I want to say that again. You have no problem you've ever had that isolation with Jesus will not cure. But you can hide in the crowd all day long, and He can talk to that crowd and say the same things, and you'll go your way and then come back again and wonder why He's not doing much where you are. So He said a second thing. Wow, this is totally impossible. He said to this man, stretch out your hand. Now what would this guy have had the right to say? Tell me. I can't. What do you mean stretch out my hand? If I could do that, I wouldn't be needing this. That's precisely the thing I can't do. Look at this. You're asking me to stretch this out? You got to be kidding. Even if I stretched out what's there, there's nothing there. Understand? Jesus Christ carries you to the brink of the impossible. Now when you act, He will carry you. But until you act, it will still look impossible. You'll declare that all day long, and He's out of business. He'll carry you. That's the way you were saved. It is impossible to save a sinner. Only God can do it. But when you heard Him command, something about the authority of His voice made you stand up to act. And that's what this guy did. He raised that arm, and suddenly, when he put that hand, what should have been a hand out there, it was healed. It was restored instantly. That's the tense of the verb. As complete as the other one, just because he obeyed something he knew he couldn't do. Here's the rule. The command of Jesus conveys the ability to do it. So when you seek to obey Him, here's what Ecclesiastes says. In the word of a king, let me say it again, in the word of a king, there is power. And King Jesus is in the synagogue that Saturday morning. He says, son, get up and come out here. And when you get out here, I want you to stretch out your hand. And something about the authority of His voice sounding in that man's soul let him know that though he could not do it, He could make him do it. And see, so he obeyed, and that thing just popped out there as old as the other one. That's what this story is about. And this is a lesson, a message in a miracle. Now, am I willing to recognize my need so I make it as conspicuous as that man's need was? Am I willing to utilize my opportunity knowing that Christ is here to isolate myself with Him? Am I willing to actualize His words so that I don't get lost in the crowd? I come to Him and then obey that impossible thing He asked me to do. That's what this story is about. Let's go to the last point. The last point, we see the product. The product is that this man became a dynamic vehicle of the glory of God and the fame of Jesus Christ. It says when these things were told abroad, a mega multitude from Galilee followed Jesus, and from Judea, and from Jerusalem, and Idumea, and beyond Jordan, and Tyre and Sidon, a mega multitude, when they heard what great things He did, that came unto Him. This man became the means of the vastly enlarging publicity of Jesus. And it happened two ways. He aroused antagonism among the enemies of Jesus, and he aroused excitement and enthusiasm in potential converts. So they just streamed out of these cities to Jesus, and his hand, his new hand, was a part of that publicity. I want you to imagine this person before we finish tonight. I want you to think of him beginning to seriously think, what in the world happened that day? That's the most important. I try to tell this, and I'm afraid to tell it. Nobody will believe it. They'll think I'm the greatest fool in the world. I go to the synagogue with no hand, just a nubbing suggestion of one. I come away, and they both look alike. I have a full hand. What am I going to tell people? They're not going to believe that. What shall I say to them? How can I make them believe it? If they knew me before, all I got to do is hold up the hand. If they didn't know me before, they're not going to believe this unless somebody else tells them. And so here's what he does. You know, I didn't have that hand 3 days ago. 4 days ago now, I didn't have that hand. 5 days ago, it wasn't even there. I better take care of this thing. Man, I don't want to lose it again. It was jeopardized one time in an act. I could lose that again. So he goes to the closet and gets out some special pieces of cloth and weaves himself a sling around his neck and for that hand. And he tucks that hand in that sling and walks around, protecting it all the time. Doesn't use it for anything. He's just protecting it like a broken arm. What's going to happen to that hand? It'll wither up again from disuse. Do you understand? When Jesus Christ heals you, he's not doing it so you can say, wow, I've got a hand. This book says, do with your might what your hand finds to do. Your hand is the implement of work and service. And this is exactly what he expects out of us. It's not just running our way to church and back home again and doing a few nice things. Those are important things, to be sure. But that's not what this is about. It is infinitely bigger than that. He wants to take that hand that he restored and deploy it so that everything it touches experiences the fingerprints of Jesus, the one who gave it back. How crippled are you? Where are you crippled? You willing to come to the place where he calls you out of the crowd, out of the anonymity of the group, into isolation with him, and now the miracle has to be performed, or you're going to not only go away crippled, you'll go away embarrassed also. The Holy Spirit speaks to you, to me right now. I'll frankly tell you, I'm embarrassed over the number of crippled places that still remain in my life. I'm embarrassed at how many times I have to stretch out a hand. And I don't want to balk on him. Every time I hear him say, today at your feet, stretch them out. Today at your knees, stretch them out. Today at your tongue. Today at your ears. Where are you crippled? Ears? You don't hear from God the way you're supposed to. Mouth? You can't speak for God the way you're supposed to. Your eyes? You can't see Jesus the way you're supposed to. You can't see yourself the way he pictures you. And you can't see lost people the way he sees them. Your feet, they're supposed to stand, and they don't. They're supposed to go, and you balk. See, they're supposed to walk. The key word for Christian vocation in the New Testament is the word walk. And you try to take a step and fall flat on your face. And all the walking you do is to the car to get to church, to the seat, and back to the car again. Well, it's much bigger than that. But are you willing to take that crippled place, hear him say, come out here, and stretch forth the part that's crippled. And he'll heal it every single time. He'll make you whole so that he can be whole and he can express himself through you. Would you bow with me and pray in conclusion tonight? As I pray, let me urge you to rethink the early part of this study. What about internalizing this truth inside of your spiritual life? What about personalizing the truth so that you personality project yourself into this story and you project the power of this story into yourself? There's an exchange that takes place there. What about all those places where you're non-functional and they're blank places where Jesus wants full function? You're crippled. Crippled. And he wants to work a miracle tonight. You there watching this on film, right there beside that projector, where you're watching it, wherever you are, you can be healed. That crippled frame in your life tonight, today. Dear Spirit of God, would you go beyond us and authorize these truths in our heart tonight, and please grant us the grace not to hide from you. Any man in his right mind would not want to withhold himself from you. Any man in his wrong mind needs to have your work in his life. We just expose ourselves as well as we know how to do. We bring the crippled parts we recognize of ourselves and ask you to make us whole tonight. And we ask you to do your work to expose the parts that we don't know about that are crippled. Make them big and real and important to us as they are to you, and then heal us tonight. Bless every person in this room. Bless every person who will watch this on film in the future, and maximize it for your eternal glory and our eternal good. I pray this in Jesus' name, and just in Jesus' name. Amen. Pastor, could we just go on?
We got some refreshments.